My name is Kristen Hawley. I am a journalist and the founder of Expedite, which is a newsletter about restaurant technology and the future of hospitality. I am not a transportation expert, but these people are, and I am so excited to be moderating this morning as we talk about micromobility in delivery. To start, I'd love for our panelists to please introduce yourselves briefly.
Hi, I'm Alan Wells, VP of Product at Zumo. Zumo provides financing, vehicles, software, and maintenance services for light electric vehicles, primarily focused on the delivery and logistics market.
Good morning. My name is Harper Mills. I am a new mobility planner with the Boston Transportation Department. In that role, I'm also the program manager for an e-cargo bike delivery pilot program called Boston Delivers.
Good morning. I'm Adam Gromis. I lead sustainability policy at Uber. I've spent most of my career thinking about how to electrify four-wheel vehicles, but I've always been a personal biking enthusiast, like getting here this morning from the BART station at Richmond to bike over on my 10-speed, which was a thrill, by the way. Shout out to the city of Richmond, which had part of the way dedicated bike lane here. If you didn't bike here, you should bike away from here. So now we're thinking a lot about electrifying 2- and 3-wheel vehicles because we see hundreds of millions of trips fulfilled on Uber in 2- and 3-wheel vehicles around the world, both for people and things. So I'm here to learn about what's working in the electrification of 2- and 3-wheel things.
Great. Hey, everyone. I'm Henna Trewn. I am the Clean Transportation Program Manager at SF Environment Department with the City of San Francisco. My team manages a variety of electrification and mode shift programs for the city, including a state-funded electric bike pilot for app-based delivery workers that we launched earlier this year.
Great, thank you so much. The title does reference two wheels, but I want to be very clear that we are not limited to talking about two-wheel vehicles.
You can talk about 3 wheels if you need to.
Yeah, actually, can you talk about 3 wheels? Are people delivering on 3 wheels today?
I think there's some 3-wheel vehicles that we see around the world, certainly for e-cargo bikes and then for auto rickshaws in places like India.
Okay. Are they going to come here?
We don't have any particular plans around that, but there's a lot of work to do to helping 3-wheel vehicles electrify.
Okay, great. So why are we talking about this today? Why is it good? I think obviously as someone who writes about the restaurant business, I can tell you that restaurant delivery, food delivery is here. It is ingrained in consumers' minds. It's not going away. So talking about micromobility in delivery, especially in cities, is very important, I think, to the future of this business. So I want to start from like top down. What problems are we trying to solve when we talk about introducing micromobility into delivery? Like why are we here? Anyone?
I can start. So from the perspective of the DOT, the rise in the demand for on-demand food delivery has been astronomical. And our streets, our curbs, simply cannot meet that demand. Given that most of these trips are being made on a car. And so I think it's really important to think about how to mitigate the impact on our curbs, on our streets. We see like a lot of the really important work that we're doing to expand bike lanes, to create bus lanes as well is undermined. Like usually every evening when we see a rush for delivery hiccups, we see double parking. It's not safe. It creates traffic. And so right-sizing these vehicles so that they have less of an impact on our transportation network, also electrifying them so that, we're able to reduce emissions as well is really important. And I also think that micromobility is good for the couriers as well. I think that given safe infrastructure, it's easier for folks to get around in a dense or urban environment. So making that option safe and accessible is important as well.
I think, to add to that, the really it's about efficiency, I think, right? Like micro mobility, small vehicles is the most efficient way to move particularly small amounts of goods, but increasingly larger amounts of goods when you think about quadricycles and trikes around a city. And that's good for everybody. It's great for consumers who get the benefit of food or groceries that arrives faster, with less opportunities for delay because their delivery person is worrying about parking or other things like that. It's good for couriers because they can have earning opportunities that aren't limited to needing to have a driver's license or needing to have a very expensive large vehicle or needing to maintain that larger vehicle over time. There's a number of challenges, like you mentioned. The infrastructure is super important. Safe vehicles are still super important. But if we can solve those things, like it really is great for everybody. And one of the reasons why I'm still super excited to work in this industry is like it's a win-win-win if you can get all those pieces to fit together. And that's the challenge, right?
The only thing I'll add is anecdotally, some of the participants in our pilot also find that kind of like being able to be active while they're working is also it's like more fun, more engaging. They appreciate kind of this other sort of mode that they can use when they're doing their work. Can you talk about the pilot? I feel like we didn't really get into it, but would love to hear details of what you're working on. Sure. So the San Francisco's ebike pilot is a California state-funded program right now. It funds e-bikes, accessories, and safety trainings and one-on-one case management for 30 participants. We started back in June. We launched our first cohort, so we're wrapping that first cohort up this month, and we've launched our second cohort this month as well, or last month as well. And the purpose of the pilot is to collect data through a pilot period of about 3 or 4 months, where we understand kind of the impact on earnings for these participants, their efficiency of the deliveries compared to a car cohort that we're comparing them to, as well as concerns or opportunities around safety, kind of feedback they have on using this mode versus the previous modes that they were using.
Can I ask Henna, because we were so excited to hear about the pilot and wanted to help when you launched it. So thanks for doing that. What are you finding in terms of the participants' experience based on the mode that they preferred before joining the program?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. We're still obviously collecting data and there's more analysis to be done, but I think some early interesting findings. We have some couriers actually that were using normal bikes before, and now they're thinking about
normal as in pedal.
Yes,
Yeah.
pedal, not mechanical. Is that the right term? Bikes, and found that they were considering maybe like discontinuing doing delivery work on those bikes. They could not afford a car. So they were thinking about what else could they do for their day-to-day work. And so having the opportunity to use an e-bike meant that they're kind of like, I think Alan was talking about efficiency. They were able to get further, faster, make a little bit more trips per hour. And it just kind of the convenience of it. I think on the flip side, switching from a car, and also we have folks I think that used motorcycles before as well, kind of like thinking about if we've heard some kind of both positives and negatives about that experience, actually going from like a vehicle mode to a gas-based vehicle mode to the e-bike. For I think just another anecdotal example is kind of like when you're in the bike lane, we've heard concerns about moving from getting off the bike lane to do kind of pick up and drop off. And kind of how easy is it to actually like get out of the bike lane and do that versus like the parking options that might be offered for more standard vehicles.
Thank you. Obviously, we can understand the broad benefit we talked about, like why this is important. Do customers, the end user, the eater, the diner care about how they're getting a delivery today?
We've asked folks who use the Uber Eats platform, our delivery platform, for both prepared foods and now more grocery and other types of sundries and things like that. And we hear mixed responses. Generally, what eaters, as we call them, care most about is selection, is cost, is time of that delivery. Want that food hot, especially when it's pizza or fries or something like that. Uh, and uh, and don't think about how it got there. And I think we as consumers often don't think about how the thing got there in our modern world. How did it get on the store shelf? How did it get there in the Amazon app? How did it get to my door? When we do ask our eaters and all Uber users about, hey, what do you think about climate? What do you think about Uber's move to help electrify everything on our platform by 2040 globally? Folks tend to be like, that's great. That would be fantastic. But by the way, we do not want to pay more for any of that. We really would like to have our cake and eat it too. Would be nice. And in fact, we'd like to pay less if that's possible. So that's what we tend to hear from consumers. I'm sure many of you hear similar things. So that's the great challenge here, I think. And I do think there's opportunities, just like what Alan and Harper were saying, in terms of the promise of electrified 2- and 3-wheel vehicles, smaller vehicles. But we have a lot of work to do with aligning incentives.
That makes sense. I remember Postmates a long time ago, before Uber owned Postmates, they would show you in the app how your food was getting there. And I think they took it away because it was a problem, because people would get upset if it was a bike or if someone walking. I think you could walk on Postmates back in the day. Do you designate how deliveries are getting to people in the app?
We do have our dispatch algorithms do think about both proximity of the courier to the merchant, the restaurant, and the consumer, and we use that to identify opportunities for both time management and safety management for the courier, but also to look for batching opportunities. We want to look for any opportunity where the courier could take 2 things from one store and deliver it to 2 eaters who are close by to one another. So we try to optimize for that. And we have mode discrimination as part of that algorithm, meaning if it's a bike and the courier said, I use a bike, we know that the radius of availability is going to be smaller than, say, for a car. And we have the app knows if you've said I'm in a bike. We have different safety trainings for those folks. We have different safety alert messages, particularly based on weather for those folks, bike helmet checks and things like that that we can look at. But we have a long way to go, I think, to be thoughtful about how the merchant, how the courier, and how the consumer interact with, say, a 2-wheel delivery.
And similarly, I'm curious what you're all hearing from, I say restaurants because that's my world, but merchants. Do they like working with alternate forms of delivery? Do they care? Does the merchant care?
Yeah, I think so. I can definitely speak to that from my experience working on the pilot program, where we've been working to recruit restaurants in a main streets area to participate in this pilot and utilize this e-cargo bike delivery service for their deliveries. One thing that I've found is, well, first of all, I think many restaurant owners, especially small businesses, they're all about the numbers. They're all about the bottom line. So that's I think the first thing that they ask. But it's a super competitive business. At the same time, I have gotten a lot of feedback where restaurants, they want to be good neighbors, and they want to be they see the impact of their delivery activity outside their window. They don't like that the couriers are blocking the street, double parking. That's not something that they want to have happen. Additionally, with some larger kind of chain operations in Boston, we have had to crack down a little bit. It's we don't have super clear enforcement mechanisms for saying that restaurants or delivery companies have to operate in a certain way, but we do have our licensing process And so as a city, we have jurisdiction over the sidewalk and over the curb. So if we see like bunching and the obstruction of the sidewalk and access, we can actually go to a restaurant and say, hey, like your license like might be at risk if you don't address this issue, which is not a conversation that we want to have with them, and that's not a conversation they want to have with us. And so they want to be good neighbors. They want to find solutions, and yeah. So I think front in that way, restaurants do care.
I want to adopt Harper's term for bunching instead of congestion. I like that a lot. It's more welcoming.
Noted as a journalist.
I love that. Can I ask both Harper and Henna? It seems like there's a big opportunity for merchant education. And I think this has come up a lot over the last couple of decades, even as I remember when New York was rolling out some of the bike hub programs for shared bike programs. And some of the biggest opposition comes from local merchants who say, don't take away that parking space. That parking space is the main way that I get business. But study after study continues to show that, particularly in dense cities, Boston, I'm thinking of downtown San Francisco, New York, it's not true. You get a lot of foot traffic, you get a lot of biking traffic, and when you take away the parking space, close the road down, heaven forbid here in San Francisco, to vehicle traffic, you can increase commerce, especially when folks like Alan are bringing in new solutions. So I'm curious about the opportunity for merchant education about what's factual for their business as we make these changes towards, say, micromobility, pedestrianization, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. My experience is that one of the biggest requests that I get in the department from business owners, restaurants, is adding pickup drop-off zones. And
Or big cars. Like
no,
curb.
so there's right. Okay, so there's like commercial loading zones for some of the larger trucks or vans, and then there are just like 15-minute general pickup drop-offs spaces. And so I almost daily get contacted by constituents who are seeing that their customers are not able to pick up, deliver, come in, go out without double parking. And that's not a good customer experience, right? I think one thing that we've been trying to look at is so we recently introduced in our traffic rules and regulations a new vehicle definition, which is a small vehicle. A small vehicle is any vehicle that does not require a license through the RMV. So e-bike, scooters, it's a very general definition. And so one of the things that we're looking at with this pilot program is installing small vehicle loading zones to allocate and sort of prioritize access to the curb for small vehicles, electric vehicles, small vehicles, so electric. And so I think that, so in terms of like whether or not businesses, there definitely still is a challenge, I think, in terms, we think about like bike planning when we want to like put bike lane and we're going to have to take away parking. We do still get a lot of pushback about that. But I think that businesses are open to kind of dynamic and flexible options for how the curb is accessed. I don't think they necessarily want like unregulated 2-hour or whatever parking. I think they just want to make sure that their customers and also their suppliers are able to get to them. Yeah, and I think we definitely need to do a better job capturing that data as well to make that case.
I was just going to add, I think San Francisco, we're still sort of in a little bit of an exploratory phase with some of these early delivery decarbonization research and pilots.
I'm personally curious to see how New York is doing as they're looking at some interesting new projects. I think they're calling it the micro hub kind of concept where like you almost have like a zero emissions delivery zone and you have a specific real estate set aside for the offloading loading space for delivery, and then from there like you're using zero emissions or two-wheel light mobility options to get to your last mile. I think that those kinds of concepts are interesting and something that we're looking into.
I love that. What color should we paint that curb for small vehicles and electric vehicles?
Teal.
Yeah, teal. Should have a vote, audience vote.
Rainbow.
It's interesting to see the different regulatory experiments going on around the world. Zumo operates in the U.S., but also in the U.K. and in Europe and Australia. Like to your question about the restaurants, what do they see about it? How do they benefit? Like the cost of the assets are lower. There's lower licensing requirements, so it makes it easier for them to hire delivery drivers. Kind of lower barriers for training. Those are all good things for restaurants. But I think where we really see kind of the pull for these solutions tends to be in jurisdictions where they have done things like ultra low emission zones, like you were mentioning, or really kind of significant constraints around where larger vehicles, like low traffic zones, where larger vehicles can drive. We're hearing from people people who do deliveries in London that they can do twice as many deliveries per hour on a cargo bike or on a quadricycle as they can in a van, because of the cumulative effects of all of these things. And working in micromobility in Silicon Valley is like one of the weirdest experiences because it's the only time in my career when I felt like this is the least progressive place in the world in some cases, because of the regulatory kind of experiments are so much further along. In London, they do like a really robust kind of, you could call it like a cash for clunkers kind of thing where they have thousands of dollars of incentives for getting high emissions vehicles off the road. We just haven't seen a lot of that in the U.S. yet. So I'm really curious with you all who are a little bit more involved on the policy side. Like, are we going to get there? Is that going to happen here?
Well, and even in London, the ultra low emission zone recently came under a lot of local political pressure from citizens who said, like, I don't want to do this. I don't want this to be charged for the vehicle I had. And the mayor, Sadiq Khan, had to pull back a little bit on some of their ULEZ schemes. Interestingly enough, on the four-wheel side, London is where we see some of the most advancing electrification in the world. And I'm from California originally. I used to work for California Air Resources Board. We have some of the best emissions regulations in the world. But London is ahead, at least in Uber's data. About 1 in every 5 miles on Uber is in a fully electric vehicle in London right now. And a lot of it has to do with the ULEZ scheme and the congestion zone charge. If you're even residents, if you move your fossil fuel vehicle once in the city, you have to pay for the privilege during a congested hour. It could be ULEZ charge plus congestion charge could be £25. Which I don't know what that is in USD. It's like $1,000. But it costs you money. And it's great because they're starting to internalize the externalities. And as a result, Alan, to your point, and we work with Zumo in London, we see a lot of uptake of e-bikes and a lot of uptake of electric four-wheel as well. And so those policy conditions, which effectively price in the cost of moving fossil-fueled vehicles, especially larger vehicles, it works. It works really well on the demand side. And then the UK marries that with supply side policies like we have in California on automakers because they have to sell EVs. We don't have the equivalent in two-wheel, by the way. There's not a requirement on, say, motorcycle manufacturers or moped manufacturers who make fossil fuel mopeds to sell electric. But folks like the California Air Resources Board are absolutely looking into a zero-emission motorcycle regulation on motorcycle manufacturers. That matters. You need supply to get lower-cost vehicles and choice to consumers. And they work. They work really well. EVs don't just show up in Norway or China or California. They're there because of policy that has taken 3 decades to put in place.
You said 1 in 5 miles in London?
1 in 5 miles on Uber in London. Yeah.
What is that in other places?
Yeah. So in California, we're really proud. It's about 1 in 10. But if you look at like continental Europe, it's like 1 in 10. So London's about double. If you look at North America, it's about 1 in every 20. So it's about double here in California. The policy makes the difference overwhelmingly.
Yeah. The delivery industry, though, we're talking about Silicon Valley and like no shade to Uber, but it's extremely powerful, right? And it is long competed on speed. Just a year ago, we were talking, I feel like this panel that I did was all like speed, 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 faster, faster, faster. And that's sort of gone away. But is it possible to advocate for these changes, especially micromobility, in the current delivery environment, given expectations and competition in terms of speed? Or does the model just fundamentally have to change? Do our expectations have to change?
Yeah, we've worked with a lot of quick commerce companies as well. GoPuff, Gorillas, Getir, and I think this micromobility is like inherently an enabler for speed. Like a lot of those companies couldn't have done what they were doing without either e-bikes or mopeds in most of those markets. So I think it's compatible for sure and aligned in most cases. I think the challenge again gets down to like these like kind of trade-offs. So the e-mopeds are a great example, right? Like most of the world still uses petrol mopeds. An e-moped, there's no reason an e-moped can't get food there as fast as a petrol moped. But today, the cost of getting an e-moped for the courier who's buying it themselves or for the company who's buying it is still higher than a petrol moped. There's a bunch of reasons why that is, but like it's interesting to ask the question of like what would need to change in order for that equation to flip? Is it incentives? Like I'm personally think that battery charging swapping networks are a really high potential thing because you can take the fixed cost of the battery, which is a huge portion, out of like the upfront cost of the vehicle. So I think there's no reason it can't be part of it, but we haven't yet kind of like cracked the puzzle pieces as to how that happens in a way where it's like the rational decision for the person who's footing the bill at the end of the day.
Yeah, and underscore what Alan's saying in terms of the competition here. I think in Europe, for instance, we see many couriers who use our app really prefer a petrol moped. It's not as popular here in the States, right? But like the Vespa type thing is what I'm talking about. And most of the couriers on Uber, in fact, I believe more than half of all our orders in Europe are fulfilled by a two-wheel vehicle of some kind. And overwhelmingly, those are fossil fueled. And it's because it offers an incredible value that also the policy and infrastructure benefits. You can take your two-wheel gas-powered moped just about anywhere. And even cities like Paris that have done a lot to clamp down on, say, car use, don't really enforce rules on petrol mopeds. They go on the sidewalks, they go on the bike lanes, they go where vehicles can't. And so that courier is optimizing their safety. They're optimizing their take-home pay, as they should. Hard to blame them. And they want to do a lot of orders in a given hour. And it's tough to compete with the value of a fossil fueled moped that you can buy in the secondary market cheap, fuel up with gas that's generally government subsidized, and take just about anywhere on the street. So if we're going to tip the scales towards an e-bicycle or an e-moped, we need to have overwhelming industry and government attention to make the value better for the courier. Because at the end of the day, they're optimizing their economics.
No, I was just going to say that I think we definitely want to move towards a future where we have, we're able to say on the government side, we're mandating that a certain share of your trips are made on an electric vehicle or or other exactly should be but then also certainly providing it financial incentives in terms of the offset of carbon emissions from that transition. The other thing I'll say is that not to overstate the influence of the public sector here, but there's so much public sector money like flowing through the transportation sector right now. There's a lot of funds to give out through state or local programs, and so I think private ventures that want to utilize those funds through the programs or whatnot that we're developing, I think definitely need to be able to articulate how their service and technology supports the things that we really care about as the city of Boston, for example, which is safety, equity, access, reliability. And so that case definitely needs to be articulated, in addition to why the technology is fast and efficient.
What can we help you do, Harper, as cities or Henna? What can we, the industry and for-profit companies, do to help you make the case? Because there's a ton of federal dollars, to your point, Harper, about for building out, say, infrastructure, for setting the policy. But what can we do as private industry? Because what we're finding, the answer to your question, Kristen, in my mind, is the infrastructure and the policy determines the speed and the safety of the mode. And overwhelmingly across the United States, the answer is going to be the car is going to be the fastest and safest way to get from A to B. But there are a few places, like in dense parts of Boston and San Francisco and New York, where the bike is maybe starting to win out. But that's determined by the infrastructure. So what can we do to help you build that out? How can we help?
Give us data. I mean, one of the big issues with delivery companies is that we can't really see where you're going, what you're doing. Like, where is the heat map of activity and need. And so that's why I think we have, so like with Boston Delivers, we're working directly with an operator where they're telling us, because of that direct relationship, we can, we know where they're going, we know what their volumes are, we're surveying their couriers to understand what their experience is navigating the infrastructure and where there are pain points so that we can respond to that. But on a large scale, like y'all are a little bit of a black box. And so I think having better access to the routing data, just like where you're going, and how we can respond like directly to where the need is, as opposed to and being like proactive about that, as opposed to just responding to like what we're seeing on the ground as it happens, and constituents like complaining about activity, or God forbid, like couriers being hurt because there isn't infrastructure. Obviously like there is a lot that we can do to like analyze our own network of protected bike lane infrastructure and curb regulations and all that. But yeah, it would be great to be a bit more informed.
Yeah, I think you captured pretty much the same response I think I would have had. I think, and we both have pilots here in SF in Boston where we're working directly with participants who are using these vehicles on the roads. But the delivery companies have a large network of users, a much broader pilot. There's a lot more kind of also granularity that you have that I think could be useful for us around like the specific routes, how the dwell time, like where are people kind of spending time, and specifically with bikes and e-bikes, where do we need more safety infrastructure, storage infrastructure, charging infrastructure? It's stuff that we are gathering slowly through various data that the cities have access to, but I think it can help us make more informed decisions for our transport agencies if we have some of that data ahead of time of what you're seeing with your workers. Thank you for asking.
Heard.
Yeah. I want to talk about courier safety, and one thing we haven't talked about is battery safety. We're talking a lot about infrastructure, but obviously e-bike battery safety education is huge. Where do things stand now, and where do they need to be in order to have a very safe network for these vehicles?
I spent a lot of time thinking about battery safety, so I could take a run at that one. I think where we are today is that you're starting to see the early signs of a recognition in the industry that this is an extremely critical topic, not only for the safety of couriers, but also for the safety of the communities that they operate in. If you see what New York has done recently in the U.S., they're the most progressive for sure, adopting things like the UL 2849 bike standard as a requirement for operating.
What's that?
The UL 2849 standard, it's a certification that happens on the bike as a whole, which includes the bike and the battery, which is a step up from what used to be kind of the standard, which was a battery level certification only. And New York is now requiring that standard for bikes that are sold into the New York market. Now, this is an amazing step forward, and I think really essential for the industry. It doesn't really work if it's very local. For two reasons. One, like you can drive over the bridge into New Jersey and buy whatever bike you want. So the enforcement is really difficult. It probably needs to be more of like a national thing where you just don't import bikes that are, below a certain standard. And so there's a lot of room for improvement there still. At the products also, I think, need to improve. Like UL 2849, it's a great step forward. But what I think the industry really needs for this use case is like commercial vehicle standards for e-bikes and for light electric vehicles. In the same way as in the larger vehicle world, you see commercial vehicle standards that apply to vehicles that have the higher utilization and different usage profile. That doesn't exist today in e-bikes. There's some work being done in Europe to progress that a little bit, but the commercial use of these vehicles is so far beyond what like a typical commuter e-bike would see that I think we're really going to have to get there as an industry to demonstrate kind of the bar for safety that we should see eventually. So lots of work to be done and lots of collaboration between public and private and delivery platforms and people who build hardware like Zumo and other OEMs to get to that point. Because the difference in the way these vehicles are used, our delivery bikes will see something like 20, 30,000 miles a year sometimes of mileage on them. That's like, 20 or 30 times what the average commuter bike will see in its entire lifetime. So the whole like supply chain just isn't set up to provide that kind of thing yet. And I think that's where we have to get to.
I have a question for Adam and Alan, and it probably depends a little bit on your business model, but in terms of fire safety and also perhaps just general safety for light mobility and workers who are on them, what sort of like public infrastructure do you think would be useful? Is public storage, charging spaces like needed, and how much of it is actually needed compared to what people can do at home or in their business places?
Yeah, I think if you look kind of at the data of where the most catastrophic incidents happen and how those things happen, they often are happening in people's residences where there's either a lot of batteries being charged all at the same time. You see like these kind of pictures of like massive strings of extension cords and things like that. There's this entire kind of gray industry of charging e-bike batteries in places like New York, where there's a really like popular market segment there of people that provide that as a service, but don't really have the infrastructure to do that safely. So I think part of it is like basic electrical infrastructure and charging cabinets and, fire safe cabinets. But there's a big part of it that's really hard to solve for, which is just the low quality components and things like that are making its way into the markets. In the automotive world, for example, we have really strict import regulations, right? So like the minimum bar on what you see getting put out there onto the road and getting parked in people's garages is pretty high. That bar is a lot lower today in bikes. So yes, you can mitigate the risk of that, I think, with what you're talking about, charging cabinets and proper electrical installations and things like that. But I think we also need to be working towards that, like raising that bar also as well.
Yeah, I think that's really right what Alan's saying, because we partnered with FDNY when after some of that was coming out, just to do education for folks that couriers who are using our app and others, to say like here's a good battery, here's a bad battery. But and then we helped sponsor a local program in New York for a swap program, but the uptake's been slow. And part of the challenge is I think we're all, cities, companies included, are fighting with both hands behind our backs, because the supply of cheap batteries into this country is hard to compete with. And how could you blame a courier for picking a cheap battery off Amazon or wherever they can find it, or a cheap conversion kit or a cheap e-bike? That's what we're competing with. So until we crack down on the supply that is worrisome, and that needs to happen at the national level, that needs to take the UL standard that Alan was talking about and lift that up to national consumer protection standards, and then the enforcement of those standards with, say, retail outlets and distribution chains, so that we can crack down on the supply. Until that's handled. It's difficult for us on the demand side to compete with the cost margin between the really cheap supply that's worrisome on a safety basis and the supply like what Zumo and others are producing that's UL certified and higher.
Great. You ended with 20 seconds on the countdown clock. Thank you very much. So I'm gonna stop it there as to not cause any delays. But thank you very much to the panelists who gave a lot of very useful information. Thank you for listening, and thank you to Micromobility for having all of us.